Hey everybody, we're gonna kind of get World War II kicked off. Here, kind of what I would call a big note assignment. 5 big topics I want to cover. There might be 2 parts to this one. I apologize for that. Just check Schoology. I'm gonna try and keep it short as much as I can. 5 big things I want to hit on. First up, Soviet Union. How is that a dictatorship? We kind of looked a little bit already on last Wednesday, but I want to check you again. Looking at Imperial Japan, Imperial Russia. Well, I can't type today either. How they fit in this whole role. The rise of Nazi Germany, Spanish Civil War, and how the whole World War II starts. So we can start looking into that stuff next week. All right. So a couple big things we gotta do here. Let's get rolling. Let's take a look at Joseph Stalin. Now he comes to power in the Soviet Union, formerly Russia, when Vladimir Ilyich Lenin dies. He's the guy who led that Bolshevik Revolution during World War One. Lenin has a stroke. He passed away in 1924, and 2 people were up to try and get power for him. One is Joseph Stalin, this man right here. The other one is Leon Trotsky. Stalin kind of does some very totalitarian things, if you will, very underhanded things. He gets people in the Soviet Union to go against Trotsky. Trotsky was Lenin's favorite, but he gets people to kind of go against Trotsky, and eventually gets Trotsky deported out of the country and then killed in Mexico where he's living. He has a guy put ice pick through Trotsky's head. Yeah, great stuff, right? There's only one person left over to take over for Lenin, and that is Joseph Stalin. Not his real name, by the way. Stalin was the name he took. Stalin literally means in Russian, man of steel. A little bit of an ego type thing. Remember that whole personality cult? He fits that bill. He allowed what were called purges in the Communist Party. When he became a dictator, he had a secret police that basically found anybody that he thought was against him and locked them up in these prisons called the Gulag. The Gulag was off in Siberia, a place where nobody could live, nobody could withstand, and you were basically worked to death in these camps. We're thinking that under his dictatorship that he called communism, it was really dictatorship. Communism where everybody shares everything. This one is a total dictatorship. Up to 30 million people died under Stalin's rule. Now, the thing is, on the outside, Stalin looked awesome from the outside in. He really changed the Soviet Union a lot. First off, he took all government control of every single factory and farm in the country. He did it to increase production. His farms were called collective farms. Early on in Russia, all little farms were run by individual people. He said the government now owns the farm, the government now owns the workers. So you're all going to work together on this farm to increase production. By doing that, they increased the amount of grain that they would make by almost 10 times. Kind of see the whole big group here working on the tractors here on this farm. So by doing that, he could feed people and also export a lot of that grain. Fortunately, a lot of grain get exported, so a lot of people still starve, but that's beyond. He also needed something called 5-year plans. 5-year plans were economic plans to build up production of coal, steel, oil, and military things. So he had these 5-year plans. And looking at the little graph now, you can see just how much things increased in the Soviet Union in tons here, and millions of tons and millions of kilowatts for electricity over the 5-year plans. First one starting in 1927 to 1932, 35 to 40. These things just jump by huge amounts of Soviet Union. They become a big military power by using this new found industrial complex to make military things happen. So basically become big economic power. Lots of poverty, lots of starvation yet, whereas people are ruling well. So the question is, were they a threat to us at this time? From the U.S. point of view, were they a threat to us? Well, communism to the United States is pretty scary because it goes against a lot of things that people in the U.S. believe in. Also, Stalin and the Bolsheviks in the revolution called for a worldwide revolution for communism. We were spread to all ends of the earth. You see the posters right here sweeping away the rulers and taking over. So, yeah, it wasn't as scary as fascism like we saw of Nazi Germany, but, still a pretty big deal. Imperial Japan's a little bit different kind of story. Imperial Japan is a very old society. They had a big belief in what's called militarism. It was a big belief that they want to have a strong military. Strong military meant strong people meant strong government. And as part of that, they really wanted to expand their territory from the little island they were on to the other islands into China, so on and so forth. And as part of their belief system, kind of the code they believed in, was you fight to gain territory, you fight to the death, you gain respect and honor that way. If you were taken captured by an enemy, that was a dishonorable issue. And we'll see later on as World War II goes along that a lot of Japanese soldiers rather commit suicide than be captured. There are very, very few Japanese POWs in the war because they would have rather have been killed and fought to the death versus be captured. Now, the emperor of Japan was a young man named Hirohito. He became emperor in 1926. He was actually emperor all the way to 1988. He was emperor for that long time. And it was very based in the Japanese religion of Shinto, which believes in spirits, and basically the emperor is a very religious kind of symbolic figure. Everyone did everything for the emperor. Every single piece of Japanese government equipment had the emperor's symbol on it. The emperor's symbol was a chrysanthemum flower. Every single Japanese rifle, every single Japanese battleship had a chrysanthemum stamped on the side of it as kind of that on it, and you did everything you did for the emperor. He was kind of the official head of government, and was passed down from father to son. And he was literally worshipped like a god, if you will, in Japan. And now, he was kind of this big symbol, he wasn't really the political head of government. Okay, he was head of government. He was not head of state. He was kind of more the figurehead, if you will. The prime minister was actually in charge of it and made all political decisions. And a lot of times it was a general in the military who got this job, and a lot of generals were kind of fighting, jockeying for position. And in the end, a guy named Hideki Tojo becomes the prime minister. He's kind of the guy who was kind of seen as almost like a military dictator, prime minister of Japan. He earns this right while fighting in China. He was a very lifelong military man. He rose through the ranks and was assigned as first off as head of army. Great kind of job. Then prime minister, and then kind of became a totalitarian leader as that prime minister in Japan. And kind of the idea of big military type government. Now, the problem Japan needs, we're do something with this on Friday if we have time, is that Japan needs to build a military industrial complex. They need to be able to build battleships and tanks and all that kind of stuff. Problem is this: do they have the stuff to do it? They don't. Japan's a small island. You have a lot of resources there. They need things like oil and rubber and coal and iron, those kind of things. And they can expand to China and other islands in the Pacific West. They can get that kind of stuff. Even in fact, one of our biggest exporters at this time, the United States, was sending our scrap metal and oil to Japan. And so the idea is they want to invade China to get those things. So when Japan right here invades into China over here, they invade what's called Manchuria up here by Korea. So here's Japan. They invade into up here, this first part here. They basically invade to get access to resources to build their advanced military, to build their big battleships and tanks and planes, that kind of stuff. I mean, Japan sends over 1 million soldiers into China. And as they kind of run through China and take this place over, the name for this period of history is unfortunately called the Rape of Manchuria, the Rape of Nanking, because the Japanese soldiers see the Chinese people as less than human, less than equal. There's a lot of murder, rape, stealing, looting, all those kind of things happen in this time period. It's really, really terrible stuff that goes on. We'll take a deeper look at that if we can on Friday. But the U.S. does impart some economic sanctions. They basically say, we're not going to trade with you anymore if you keep doing this stuff, and if you don't stop it, where we are not going to trade with you anymore. So it's kind of that threat we have. Now, going from China, go from Soviet Union to Japan, let's go take a look at Adolf Hitler and his rise to power. First off, here's Hitler. Obviously, you kind of see him in the Nazi uniform. He was not German originally. He was from Austria. He decided to fight during World War I for the German army, though. His identity, his ethnic group, he felt, was more German than it was Austrian. Now, he was actually originally in art school. He loved to paint watercolor landscapes. He loved to paint. Definitely a lot of landscapes, those kind of things. And so he left art school, fought in World War I for Germany. He was actually awarded the Iron Cross. The Iron Cross was the highest ranks in the German military. In fact, he actually wore the Iron Cross on his uniform every single day, even when he became dictator. He really wanted to return to art school after the war, but he ended up failing out. So, when he was born, in Austria. His father was a lot older than his mother was. Father really ignored him a lot, but his mother loved him. They moved around a lot, so they're really close to the German border. But by the time that Hitler's dad died, Hitler was only 13 years old, and he was really head of household at that time. And so he has some definitely got issues kind of going on there. And I said, him and his friends really identified a lot more with Germany than Austria. They felt they were German, and they kind of saw the problems of Germany post World War I as being, they blamed it on certain people. They blamed it mostly on communists and Jews. A lot of times you'd have kind of a scapegoat, if you will. Okay, the German nationalists thought, the Germans didn't do this thing. It was the communists in government, the Jews in the government that made things bad for Germany. And so they started something called the German Workers' Party, which if you take it in German and you make it into an acronym, it spells Nazi. So one of the big ideas was being anti-Semitic, which means hatred of Jews, and they really blamed the Jews for this. Now, originally, Hitler was hired by the army to go investigate this party, and as he listened to these things, he liked the ideas, and ended up joining, and eventually became chairman of the party and a chief speaker. And later on, 1922, this party had their own little uniform. They kind of developed some fascist ideas. They had their own hardcore guys who were called the brown shirts. Mussolini had the black shirts. Hitler has the brown shirts. They're the stormtroopers. And they march into city Hamburg and attempt to overthrow the local government at a beer hall they're at. It's what's called the beer hall push. Push being revolution. And so as Hitler is trying to overthrow the government, he's arrested, and is sentenced to 5 years, 8 months in jail. He doesn't spend long in there. In fact, he spends the entire time in jail writing a book with his personal secretary in his own little cell. His book is called Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. And that book basically becomes the platform for the Nazi Party. All the things the Nazis really truly believe in are written in Mein Kampf. Everything from blaming the Jews, communists, all those kind of things comes out of it. Well, after prison, he doesn't spend his whole full time in there. He goes back to the party and becomes speaking. They call him the Führer. Führer just basically means leader in German, and becomes the leader of this party. There are different groups that he has. He has the SA, which are his brown shirts, and the SS, which literally actually translates into Stormtrooper, which are your black shirt guys, kind of the really hardcore shock troops, if you will. Another group they develops from the Nazi Party is something called the Hitler Youth. Think of it almost as being Nazi Boy Scouts, if you will. You kind of start the program young, and they're learning the ideas of Nazism when they're very, very young. Well, the Nazis become an actual political party. As we saw in a little activity on last week, they start winning seats in the Reichstag, and they start making promises. We're going to find ways to fix the economy. You know, it's all this group's fault. It's blame them for all these problems that are happening. And by 1932, Hitler runs for president, but loses to a very famous World War I vet named Paul von Hindenburg. But while he runs for his office, the Nazis win enough seats in the Reichstag, the Congress, that the chancellor of the party, kind of the second in command, if you will, gets to be one of their party. And Hindenburg chooses Hitler from the Nazis to be the chancellor. Yes, Hindenburg picked the guy who later became the dictator. Now, in 1933, a weird thing happens in Germany. The Reichstag building, the Congress building, if you will, of Germany, burns down. And right away, the Nazis say communists did it. They blame the communists. Now, we actually know who burned down the Reichstag. We have no idea, but he blames it on the communists. And Hitler right away comes out, and his chance is fine. Communists, you're out of the Reichstag. You're done. You're out of government. And so he starts blaming the communists for trying to overthrow the government. And he ends the Reichstag. There's no more Reichstag anymore. Well, by 1934, Hitler starts kicking people out of the Nazi Party. Anybody he thinks that might be kind of see this idea of totalitarianism, right? Anybody he thinks that might be an opponent of his, he starts kicking them out. And so by the end, about 100 people come out, and the head of the SS, this guy named Heinrich Himmler, we'll talk about him a little later on. He is Hitler's right-hand man, and he's really in charge of the SS, who are the really strict, really strong, kind of the Nazi, pretty crazy Nazi guys. Okay, and Heinrich Himmler, this guy who was Hitler's right-hand man, does about 100 executions of actual Nazis who were, Hitler felt were kind of to take him out of power. Well, in 1934, President von Hindenburg unexpectedly dies. We're not sure how, rumors he died of natural causes. Who knows if actually natural causes or not. Hitler takes over, abolishes the idea of presidency, and guess who's in charge, ladies and gentlemen? Hitler's in charge. So what he starts doing, he starts reviving industry. So he said, okay, guys, we're going to make military equipment. Bombs, tanks, planes, guns. The things that they cannot make under the rules of the Treaty of Versailles. It's illegal. He says, stop me. All right. Now, by getting people working again, now all of a sudden you have the economic problems are gone. More people have money, and people start saying, hey, the Nazis are helping us. We like this. He starts kind of the idea of anti-Semitism starts becoming a big part of what's happening here. Hitler kind of starts talking about saying, hey, the Jews, the communists, they were the problem for everything happening in Germany. We should blame them for it. And so the Holocaust starts in terms of Germans and Nazis beating on the Jews and the communists, and we see the concentration camps start, which we'll talk about at the end of our unit. We'll do a little mini unit here on the Holocaust. One of the big things he says is that we can be proud to be German, right? These huge rallies here. You got to be proud to be German, fight for the fatherland, get our fatherland back. Those are all issues that he really brings up. Another thing he does, he actually rearms Germany by getting their military back and those kind of things. He has a lot of shows of power here. Okay, we see the big marches. You can't see the picture here. All the people are these big, huge marches to see Hitler speak. The rallies, the speeches. They use propaganda that show Germans are best, Germans are more powerful, the world's against us, kind of things. And really, as I said, the idea of fascism is things of being super nationalist. It's nationalist steroids. You got to be proud to be German. Use that symbol of the swastika, the Hitler salute. All those kind of things play a big role in the rise of Nazis to power. And we're going to stop there, guys. We're going to pick up next video here in Schoology. Will be the next little video we'll do. So please check that one out next on our next part. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.